They called it camping adventure, but 8-year-old Tommy Johnson knew they were living in their car. For 3 weeks, the Johnson family had been sleeping in a 1967 Ford station wagon parked behind the Las Vegas Denny's, with their school clothes folded neatly in the trunk, and their father Robert leaving at 4 a.m. each morning for his first of 3 jobs. Linda Johnson, a former registered nurse, would wake her 3 children quietly and help them get ready for school in the restaurant bathroom, making sure they looked clean and normal so their classmates would never suspect their secret. What their teacher didn't know was that Robert was working construction during the day, delivering packages in the afternoon, and washing dishes at night, yet still couldn't afford a security deposit for an apartment. But what Robert didn't know was that his honesty and work ethic had already caught the attention of someone who would change their lives forever. But to understand why this family's story would prove that dignity doesn't depend on having an address, and that sometimes help comes from the most unexpected places, you need to know about the promise Robert made to his children the night they first slept in the car. A promise he was determined to keep no matter what. It was September 15, 1975, and the Johnson family's situation had reached a breaking point that no amount of hard work seemed able to fix. Robert Johnson was 34 years old, a skilled carpenter who had been laid off from his steady construction job when the Las Vegas housing boom temporarily slowed down. What should have been a temporary setback had turned into a nightmare when their landlord sold their apartment building and gave all tenants 30 days to vacate. Robert had immediately started looking for work, but the construction industry in Las Vegas was unpredictable. Some weeks there was plenty of work, other weeks there was nothing. The irregular income made it impossible to secure new housing, because every landlord wanted proof of steady employment and first month's rent plus security deposit up front. Even working 3 different jobs, Robert was earning just enough to buy food and gas, but never enough to save the $800 needed for an apartment deposit. Linda tried to return to nursing, but after being out of the workforce for 8 years to raise their children, she found that hospitals wanted more recent experience. The best she could find was part-time work cleaning hotel rooms, which paid minimum wage and offered no benefits. Between Robert's 3 jobs and Linda's hotel work, they were putting in more hours than most families ever worked, yet they still couldn't escape the cycle of poverty that seemed designed to keep them trapped. The hardest part wasn't the discomfort of sleeping in the car or the constant worry about money. The hardest part was watching their children try to maintain normalcy while their world fell apart. 12-year-old Sarah had stopped bringing friends home from school because she couldn't explain why they didn't have a home to visit. 10-year-old Michael had become quiet and withdrawn, spending most of his time reading library books to escape their reality. And 8-year-old Tommy kept asking questions that broke his parents' hearts. "Daddy, when are we going to stop camping and go back to our house?" Tommy had asked on their 15th night in the car. Robert looked at his youngest son, this beautiful, innocent boy who deserved so much better than a parking lot behind a 24-hour diner, and made a promise that would define everything that followed. "Tommy, I promise you that we're going to have a real home again," Robert had said, his voice steady despite the tears in his eyes. "I don't know exactly when, and I don't know exactly how, but I promise you that Daddy is going to fix this. And until then, we're going to take care of each other, and we're going to remember that being a family isn't about having a house. It's about having each other." What Robert didn't realize was that his promise was being tested in ways he couldn't have imagined. The stress of their situation was taking a toll on everyone. Linda had started having panic attacks in the middle of the night, afraid that social services would discover their situation and take their children away. Robert was working such long hours that he barely saw his family except when they were all sleeping in the cramped car. The children were struggling in school, not because they weren't smart, but because it's hard to concentrate on homework when you're doing it by the light of a fast food restaurant sign. The breaking point came on their 21st night of homelessness. Robert had just finished his dishwashing shift at a downtown restaurant when he returned to the Denny's parking lot to find Linda crying quietly in the front seat while the children slept in the back. She had received a call from Sarah's school asking why Sarah had been falling asleep in class and whether there were any problems at home that they should know about. "I don't know how much longer I can keep lying to everyone," Linda whispered to Robert as they sat in the car that had become their entire world. The kids are suffering, I'm suffering, you're killing yourself working 3 jobs, and we're still here in this parking lot with no end in sight. Robert held his wife's hand and felt the weight of his promise to Tommy pressing down on his chest like a physical force. He had always prided himself on being able to provide for his family, on being the kind of man who solved problems through hard work and determination. But this problem seemed bigger than anything he could fix alone. "I'll figure something out," Robert said, though he had no idea what that something might be. "I have to." What Robert didn't know was that his something was already being set in motion by forces he could never have predicted. Earlier that evening, as Robert was washing dishes at the downtown restaurant, Elvis Presley had been finishing his second show of the night at the Las Vegas International Hotel. It had been a typical performance for Elvis, energetic, engaging, filled with the charisma that had made him the most famous entertainer in the world. But Elvis had been restless lately. Success had brought him everything he thought he wanted: fame, fortune, more luxury than he could use in 10 lifetimes. Yet something was missing. He felt disconnected from the real world, surrounded by people who told him only what they thought he wanted to hear, living in a bubble of celebrity that sometimes felt more like a prison than a privilege. After his show, instead of going back to his suite as he usually did, Elvis decided to take a drive through Las Vegas. He wanted to see the city that had become his second home, to connect with the real world beyond the hotel walls and concert venues. It was nearly 1 a.m. when Elvis, driving his black Cadillac with just his bodyguard Joe Esposito beside him, pulled into the Denny's parking lot for coffee. That's when he saw them, a family of 5 sleeping in an old Ford station wagon, their belongings organized neatly around them, their father sitting in the driver's seat looking like he was carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. Elvis had grown up poor in Mississippi and Memphis, and he recognized something in Robert Johnson's posture that he remembered from his own father's face during the hardest times. "Joe," Elvis said quietly. "You see that family over there?" Joe looked toward the station wagon, where the Johnson family was settling in for another night of what Tommy still believed was their camping adventure. "Yeah, I see them," Joe replied. "They're living in that car," Elvis said, and it wasn't a question. He could tell from the way their belongings were arranged, from the makeshift curtains hung over the windows for privacy, from the resigned way Robert sat staring out at nothing. "They're homeless." Elvis sat in his Cadillac for nearly 20 minutes, just watching the Johnson family and thinking about the contrast between his own life of luxury and this family's struggle to survive. Finally, he made a decision that would change everything. "I want to help them," Elvis said. "Elvis, we don't know anything about them," Joe replied. Always the practical one. They could be drug addicts, criminals, anything. But Elvis had already made up his mind. "Look at them, Joe. Look at how organized they are, how clean the children's clothes are. Look at that man's face. That's not a criminal. That's a father who's trying to take care of his family and doesn't know how." Elvis got out of the Cadillac and walked slowly toward the Johnson family's car. Robert noticed him approaching and immediately became tense, protective. Strange men approaching your family in a parking lot at 1 a.m. was never a good sign. "Excuse me," Elvis said softly, staying far enough away to not seem threatening. "I don't mean to disturb you folks." Robert rolled down his window just enough to respond. "Can I help you with something?" "Actually, I was hoping I could help you," Elvis said. In the dim light of the parking lot, Robert didn't immediately recognize who was speaking to him. "I'm sorry if this is forward, but are you folks having some housing troubles?" Linda stirred in the passenger seat, instantly alert and protective. "We're fine," Robert said quickly. Just passing through town." Elvis could hear the pride in Robert's voice, the refusal to admit defeat or ask for charity. It was a pride he understood completely, having grown up in a family where accepting help was seen as admitting failure. "I respect that," Elvis said. "But I want you to know that there's no shame in needing help sometimes. I grew up poor myself, and I remember what it's like when you're working as hard as you can, and it still doesn't seem like enough." Something in Elvis's voice made Robert look at him more carefully. In the glow from the Denny's sign, he began to realize who was standing beside their car. "Are you?" Robert started, then shook his head. "No, that's impossible." Elvis smiled gently. "I'm Elvis Presley, and I'd like to help your family if you'll let me." What happened next would become one of the most important conversations of Elvis's life, and certainly the most important of Robert Johnson's life. But to understand why Elvis's offer of help would transform not just the Johnson family's circumstances but their entire understanding of what it means to maintain dignity while accepting assistance, you need to know about the principles that guided both men and how those principles were about to be tested. Robert Johnson stared at Elvis Presley standing beside his car at 1 a.m. in a Denny's parking lot, wondering if he was dreaming or if the stress of their situation had finally caused him to lose his mind. This couldn't be real. The most famous entertainer in the world didn't just appear in parking lots offering to help homeless families. "I know this seems strange," Elvis said, as if reading Robert's thoughts. "But I meant what I said. I'd like to help you and your family." Linda was now fully awake and listening to every word. She recognized Elvis's voice immediately. She had been a fan since she was a teenager. But more than that, she could hear the sincerity in his tone, the genuine concern that had nothing to do with publicity or image. "Mr. Presley," Robert said, his voice carefully respectful, "we appreciate the kindness, but we don't take charity. I work 3 jobs. My wife works. We're not looking for handouts." Elvis nodded approvingly. "I can see that. Anyone can see that, just by looking at your family. Your children's clothes are clean and pressed. Your car is organized and well maintained. This isn't about you not working hard enough. This is about a system that doesn't pay working people enough to live." Those words hit Robert like a revelation. For weeks he had been blaming himself for their situation, wondering what he was doing wrong, why his best efforts weren't enough. To hear someone else, especially someone as successful as Elvis, acknowledge that the problem wasn't his work ethic, but the system itself, was both validating and liberating. "Tell me about your situation," Elvis said, "if you're comfortable sharing." And so at 1:30 a.m. in a Denny's parking lot, Robert Johnson found himself telling Elvis Presley about the past 3 weeks that had turned his family's life upside down. He talked about the apartment building sale that forced them out, about the construction layoff that started their problems, about the impossible catch-22 of needing steady employment to get housing, but needing an address to maintain steady employment. Elvis listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding or asking clarifying questions. What struck him most was Robert's complete lack of self-pity. Even when describing their most desperate moments, Robert focused on his family's resilience and his determination to fix their situation. "What kind of work did you do before the layoff?" Elvis asked. "Construction, mainly residential. I'm a Finnish carpenter specializing in custom cabinetry and trim work, but I can do framing, electrical, plumbing, pretty much anything that needs doing on a house." Elvis's mind began working. He owned several properties in Las Vegas, including a large house he had purchased as an investment but never used. The house needed extensive renovation work before it could be rented or sold. More than that, Elvis had been looking for someone to oversee maintenance and improvements on all his Las Vegas properties, someone trustworthy, who could handle the work without constant supervision. "Robert, I have a proposition for you," Elvis said. "But first I want to make something clear. This isn't charity. This is business. I'm offering you a job, not a handout." Robert's entire demeanor changed. "What kind of job?" "I own a house here in Las Vegas that needs a complete renovation. Kitchen, bathrooms, flooring, the works. It's good quality work that needs someone with real skill. The job would pay well enough to support your family comfortably, and there's enough work to keep you busy for months, maybe longer if you're interested in ongoing maintenance on my other properties." Linda grabbed Robert's hand, hardly daring to hope that this conversation was really happening. "But here's the thing," Elvis continued. "The house is sitting empty. and it would be more convenient for everyone if the contractor was living on site to secure the property and be available for any issues that come up. The house is furnished and fully functional. Your family could live there while you do the renovation work. Robert was quiet for a long moment, processing what Elvis was offering. It wasn't charity, it was employment. It wasn't a handout, it was an opportunity to use his skills and earn his family's way out of their crisis. What's the catch? Robert asked. Because in his experience, offers that sounded too good to be true usually were. Elvis appreciated the question. It showed that Robert was thinking clearly, not just jumping at the first offer of escape from their situation. No catch, Elvis said. I need the work done. You need the work. The only requirement is that it has to be done right. I don't accept shoddy work, and I don't accept excuses. But if you're as good as you seem to be, we'll both benefit from the arrangement. Linda squeezed Robert's hand tighter. She could see her husband weighing the offer, fighting between his pride and his desperation to get their children out of this parking lot and into a real home. Can I ask you something, Mr. Presley? Robert said. Of course. Why? Why are you doing this? You don't know us. You don't owe us anything. Elvis was quiet for a moment, looking at the Johnson family's station wagon, at the 3 children sleeping peacefully in the back seat, trusting their parents to keep them safe even in these impossible circumstances. My daddy worked construction when I was growing up, Elvis said finally. There were times when we didn't know where our next meal was coming from, times when we had to move because we couldn't pay rent. I remember what it felt like to be hungry, to be ashamed of where we lived, to watch my parents work themselves to death and still not have enough. He paused, looking directly at Robert. I've been blessed beyond anything I ever imagined possible, but I remember where I came from, and I remember what it feels like when you're working as hard as you can, and it still isn't enough. If I can help a hard-working family get back on their feet, especially when it also helps me get work done that I need done anyway, that seems like something worth doing. Robert looked at his wife, saw the hope and desperation in her eyes, thought about Tommy's question earlier that evening about when their camping adventure would end. He thought about his promise to his son, about his commitment to providing for his family, about the difference between accepting charity and accepting an opportunity to earn their way forward. When could I start? Robert asked. Elvis smiled, the first genuine smile he'd felt in weeks. How about tomorrow morning? I'll have someone meet you at the house at 9 a.m. to show you around and discuss the specific work that needs to be done. Mr. Presley, Linda said, speaking for the first time since Elvis had approached their car. I don't know how to thank you. You don't need to thank me, Elvis replied. Just let your husband do good work, and we'll call it even. But Elvis wasn't finished. As he prepared to leave, he turned back to the Johnson family. One more thing, he said. Robert, I know you're a man who pays his own way, and I respect that, but your children have been through a lot these past few weeks. Tomorrow morning, before you start work, I want you to take them shopping for anything they need. New clothes, school supplies, toys, whatever they want. Consider it an advance on your first week's salary. Robert started to protest, but Elvis held up his hand. This isn't negotiable, Elvis said, firmly but kindly. Those kids have been brave and strong during a very difficult time. They deserve to feel like kids again, not like they have to worry about money every day. Let them pick out things that make them happy, and don't worry about the cost. With that, Elvis returned to his Cadillac and drove away, leaving the Johnson family sitting in their station wagon in a Denny's parking lot, trying to process what had just happened to their lives. Robert looked at Linda, saw tears streaming down her face, and felt something he hadn't experienced in weeks: hope. Did that really just happen? Linda whispered. I think it did, Robert replied, still not quite believing it himself. In the back seat, Tommy stirred and opened his eyes. Daddy, is our camping adventure over? Robert turned to look at his youngest son, this beautiful boy who had trusted his parents to keep their promise even when it seemed impossible. Yeah, buddy, Robert said, his voice thick with emotion. Our camping adventure is over. Tomorrow we're going to our new house." The next morning, the Johnson family drove to the address Elvis had given them, hardly believing that their nightmare might actually be ending. The house was more beautiful than they had dared to imagine. A 3-bedroom ranch-style home with a large yard, modern kitchen, and enough space for their family to spread out and breathe again. Joe Esposito was waiting for them as promised, along with a construction supervisor who would oversee the renovation project. The house needed significant work: new flooring throughout, updated bathrooms, a complete kitchen renovation, and exterior painting, but it was structurally sound and immediately livable. "Elvis wanted me to make sure you understand the terms," Joe explained to Robert as Linda and the children explored their temporary new home. "You'll be paid standard contractor wages for the renovation work, plus a housing allowance for living on site. The work should take about 6 months, maybe longer if you find additional projects that need attention." Robert nodded, still processing the magnitude of what Elvis had done for their family. "He also wanted me to give you this," Joe continued, handing Robert an envelope. "It's an advance on your first month's salary, plus extra for the children's shopping trip he mentioned." Robert opened the envelope and found more money than he had seen in months, enough to buy his children everything they needed and more. "Joe," Robert said, "I need you to understand something. I'm going to earn every penny of this money. This house is going to be perfect when I'm finished with it. Elvis Presley is never going to regret giving our family this opportunity." Joe smiled. "Elvis knew you'd say something like that. Wonderforters re, Wudamorda be like. That's why he offered you the job." The shopping trip that afternoon became one of the most joyful experiences the Johnson family had shared in months. Sarah picked out new clothes for school and art supplies for the drawings she loved to create. Michael chose books and a model airplane kit he had been wanting for months. Tommy selected a toy construction set, saying he wanted to learn to build things like his daddy. But the most meaningful moment came when they returned to their new temporary home that evening. As Linda tucked Tommy into his own bed for the first time in weeks, he looked up at her with the wisdom that sometimes comes to children who have been through difficult times. "Mommy," Tommy said, "Daddy kept his promise, didn't he?" Linda smiled, remembering Robert's commitment that they would have a real home again, even when it seemed impossible. "Yes, sweetheart," she replied. "Daddy kept his promise." But Linda knew that Robert's promise had been kept with help from someone who understood that sometimes the difference between despair and hope is simply having someone believe in your potential and give you the opportunity to prove it. Over the following months, Robert Johnson threw himself into the renovation work with the dedication and skill that had impressed Elvis from the beginning. He arrived early every morning, worked methodically through each project, and maintained standards that exceeded even Elvis's expectations. More importantly, the Johnson family began to heal from the trauma of their homelessness. The children's grades improved, their confidence returned, and they began to talk about their future with optimism instead of fear. Linda found part-time nursing work at a local clinic, using her skills to help other families while contributing to their household income. Elvis stopped by the house periodically to check on the renovation progress, and each time he was impressed not only by the quality of Robert's work, but by the transformation he saw in the Johnson family. The children were thriving, Linda looked healthier and more relaxed, and Robert had regained the dignity that comes from providing for his family through honest work. 6 months later, when the renovation was complete, Elvis offered Robert a permanent position managing maintenance and improvements on all his Las Vegas properties. It was steady work with good pay and benefits, the kind of employment security that the Johnson family had been seeking all along. But more than the job, Elvis had given the Johnson family something even more valuable. He had shown them that dignity and self-reliance could coexist with accepting help when it was needed. He had demonstrated that true charity isn't about creating dependence, but about creating opportunities for people to help themselves. The Johnson family's story became legendary among Elvis's friends and associates, not because of the dramatic rescue, but because of what it revealed about Elvis's character. Here was a man who could have simply written a check or made a donation to a homeless shelter and felt good about his generosity. Instead, he chose to get personally involved, to offer not just money but opportunity, and to treat a struggling family with the respect and dignity they deserved. The transformation of the Johnson family continued in ways that none of them could have predicted when they were sleeping in that Denny's parking lot. Robert's work ethic and attention to detail impressed everyone who saw the renovation project. Word began to spread through Las Vegas construction circles about the quality of his craftsmanship, and other contractors started approaching him for consultation on high-end projects. But it was what happened 6 months after the renovation was complete that truly showed the lasting impact of Elvis's intervention in their lives. Robert had not only finished the house renovation ahead of schedule and under budget, but he had identified and corrected several structural issues that could have become expensive problems later. His work was so impressive that Elvis offered him something unprecedented, a partnership in his Las Vegas property investments. Robert Elvis said during one of his visits to inspect the completed renovation, "I've been thinking about expanding my real estate investments here in Las Vegas. But I need someone I can trust completely, someone who understands both the construction side and the business side. Someone who knows what it's like to work for every dollar and won't take success for granted." The offer was staggering. Elvis was proposing to make Robert a partner in purchasing, renovating, and managing rental properties throughout Las Vegas. It would mean steady, substantial income for the Johnson family, but more than that, it would mean building generational wealth that could secure their children's futures. Robert was overwhelmed by the opportunity, but he was also cautious. "Mr. Presley, I appreciate your confidence in me, but I need to ask why you're offering this. I'm grateful for everything you've already done for my family, but this seems like more than anyone could expect." Elvis sat down at the kitchen table that Robert had built during the renovation, running his hand over the smooth finish of the wood. "Robert, let me tell you something about success that I wish someone had told me when I was starting out. Real success isn't about accumulating wealth for yourself. Real success is about creating opportunities for other people to build their own wealth." He paused, looking around at the beautifully renovated house that showcased Robert's skills. "I've made more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes, but I've learned that money without purpose is just numbers in a bank account. What gives money meaning is using it to create more opportunities for people who have the skills and character to succeed." Robert listened intently as Elvis continued. "You've proven that you're not just skilled, you're trustworthy. You completed this project better than I expected, and you did it with integrity. Those are rare qualities in any business, but especially in construction and real estate. I need a partner who shares my values and won't cut corners just to increase profits." The partnership proposal included a detailed business plan that Elvis and his financial advisors had developed. They would start by purchasing properties that needed significant renovation. Robert would oversee the construction work, and they would either sell the completed properties or rent them to families who needed quality, affordable housing. "There's one condition," Elvis added. "Part of our business model has to include providing opportunities for other people who are in situations like your family was. I want some of our properties to be available for rent-to-own programs for working families who can't qualify for traditional mortgages. And I want us to hire other skilled tradespeople who are having trouble finding steady work." This condition aligned perfectly with Robert's own values. He had never forgotten what it felt like to be skilled, hardworking, and still unable to provide basic security for his family. The idea of creating opportunities for other families in similar situations gave their business venture a purpose that went beyond profit. Linda was initially hesitant about the partnership offer. "Robert, what if something goes wrong? What if we fail and end up worse than we started?" But Robert had gained confidence over the past months, not just in his skills but in his ability to assess opportunities and risks. "Linda, failing would mean going back to where we were a year ago. But if we don't try, we'll always wonder what might have been possible." They decided to accept Elvis's partnership offer, and over the next 2 years, the Johnson-Presley Real Estate Partnership became one of the most successful property investment ventures in Las Vegas. Robert's construction expertise combined with Elvis's financial resources and business connections created a formula for success that benefited everyone involved. But the success went far beyond financial gains. The partnership employed dozens of skilled tradespeople who had been struggling to find steady work. Their rent-to-own program helped more than 40 families transition from renting to home ownership, and their commitment to quality construction and fair business practices set new standards in the Las Vegas real estate market. The impact on the Johnson children was profound. Sarah, now 13, began spending time at construction sites learning about architecture and design. She would eventually study architecture at UNLV on a scholarship that Elvis privately funded, though she wouldn't learn about his involvement in years later. Michael, 11, was fascinated by the business side of their operations. He started creating detailed financial projections for their projects, showing an early aptitude for business that would eventually lead him to a successful career in finance. Tommy, now 9, split his time between construction sites with his father and music lessons that Linda had enrolled him in. Elvis occasionally stopped by their house to hear Tommy play piano, offering encouragement and advice that helped nurture the boy's natural musical talent. The lessons the children learned during this period would shape their entire approach to success and responsibility. They saw their parents work hard, treat people fairly, and use their success to create opportunities for others. They learned that wealth was not something to be hoarded but something to be shared responsibly. 2 years after their partnership began, Elvis and Robert were featured in a Las Vegas Business Journal article about innovative approaches to affordable housing. The article highlighted their rent-to-own program and their employment practices, but it also revealed something that Robert hadn't known. Elvis had been quietly using their partnership model to create similar programs in Memphis, Nashville, and other cities where he had business interests. What we've learned in Las Vegas is that when you give skilled people the opportunity and resources they need, they don't just succeed, they excel. Elvis was quoted in the article. Robert Johnson and his family are proof that the American dream isn't dead. It just needs people who are willing to invest in other people's potential. The article caught the attention of federal housing officials who were looking for successful models of affordable housing programs that could be replicated nationally. Within months, Elvis and Robert were consulting with government agencies and non-profit organizations about how to implement their approach in other markets. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. 3 years after their partnership began, Robert received a letter from a family in Memphis whose lives had been changed by one of their affiliated programs. The letter was from a single mother who had been able to purchase her first home through their rent-to-own program. Mr. Johnson, the letter read, "I wanted you to know that because of your program, my children will grow up in a house that we own, not just rent. They'll have stability and security that I never had as a child. But more than that, they'll grow up knowing that there are people in this world who believe in helping others succeed. I hope someday I can pass that gift on to another family." Robert showed the letter to Linda that evening, and they both understood that their success had meaning far beyond their own family's security. They were part of something larger, a network of people who understood that true prosperity comes from creating opportunities for others. By the time Tommy turned 12, the Johnson family's transformation was complete in ways that went far beyond financial success. They had moved from homelessness to homeownership, from desperation to security, from isolation to community leadership. But they had never forgotten where they came from or the people who had helped them along the way. Elvis continued to be part of their lives, not just as a business partner but as a friend and mentor. He attended the children's school events, celebrated their achievements, and provided guidance during challenging times. His relationship with the Johnson family became one of the most meaningful friendships of his life. The last conversation between Elvis and Robert took place just weeks before Elvis's death in August 1977. They were reviewing plans for a new affordable housing development in Memphis when Elvis became reflective about their partnership and friendship. "Robert, I want you to know that helping your family wasn't charity for me. It was one of the smartest business decisions I ever made. But more than that, it was one of the most important things I've ever done." Elvis paused, looking at the construction plans spread across the table. "When I was growing up poor, I used to dream about being rich enough that money would never be a problem again. but I learned that having money without purpose is meaningless. Your family gave my success a purpose that made it meaningful." Robert was moved by Elvis's words, but he wanted to make sure Elvis understood the full impact of his generosity. "Mr. Presley, Elvis, what you did for us wasn't just about giving us jobs or housing. You gave us back our dignity. You treated us like partners, not charity cases. You showed us that accepting help doesn't mean giving up your self-respect." "That's because I never saw you as charity cases," Elvis replied. "I saw you as hard-working people who deserved a chance to succeed. The fact that you've succeeded beyond anything I could have imagined just proves that I was right to believe in you." After Elvis's death, the Johnson family continued the work they had started together. Robert expanded their affordable housing programs and established the Elvis Presley Foundation for Working Families, which continues to provide opportunities for skilled workers who are struggling to find steady employment. Sarah Johnson became one of Las Vegas's most respected architects, specializing in affordable housing design. Michael Johnson became a successful business consultant who helps non-profit organizations develop sustainable funding models. Tommy Johnson became both a successful contractor and a professional musician, using his talents in both fields to support community development programs. But perhaps the most important legacy of Elvis's intervention in the Johnson family's life is the ripple effect of their success. The dozens of families who have been helped by their programs, the hundreds of skilled workers who have found employment through their projects, and the thousands of people who have been inspired by their story, all represent the continuing impact of one man's decision to help a family in need. Today, more than 45 years after that night in the Denny's parking lot, the story of Elvis and the Johnson family is still told in business schools as an example of successful public-private partnerships, in social work programs as a model of effective intervention, and in families around the world as proof that individual actions can create lasting change. The Johnson family never forgot the lesson that Elvis taught them, that success is not about accumulating wealth, but about using whatever resources you have to create opportunities for others. And they never forgot that sometimes the difference between despair and hope is simply having someone believe in your potential and give you the chance to prove it. In a world that often seems divided by economic inequality and social injustice, the story of Elvis and the Johnson family reminds us that bridges can be built between different worlds through respect, dignity, and the understanding that everyone deserves a chance to succeed when given the right opportunity. The camping adventure that began with a family sleeping in their car behind a Denny's became a journey that transformed not just one family's life, but created a model for how success can be shared and multiplied. And it all started with one man's decision to see potential instead of problems, and to offer opportunity instead of pity. The legacy of that September night in 1975 continued to grow in ways that would have amazed everyone involved in the original encounter. The Johnson-Presley partnership became a case study taught in business schools across the country, not just for its financial success, but for its innovative approach to combining profit with social responsibility. By the 1980s, their affordable housing model had been adopted by cities in 12 states, helping over 300 families transition from renting to homeownership. The employment program they developed had provided steady work for more than 200 skilled tradespeople who had been struggling to find consistent employment in traditional construction markets. The ripple effects extended far beyond housing and employment. The families who were helped by their programs went on to help others, creating a network of mutual support that spread throughout working-class communities across the American South and West. Children who grew up in homes purchased through their rent-to-own program went on to become teachers, nurses, entrepreneurs, and community leaders, many of whom established their own programs to help families in need. Dr. Patricia Williams, a sociologist at UNLV who studied the long-term impact of the Johnson-Presley partnership, documented the generational effects of their intervention. What Elvis and Robert created wasn't just a business partnership, Dr. Williams wrote in her 1985 research paper. They created a sustainable model for breaking the cycle of poverty through dignity-preserving assistance and genuine opportunity creation. Her research followed 47 families who had been helped by various Johnson Presley programs over a 10-year period. The results were remarkable. 93% of the families maintained stable housing, 87% showed significant increases in household income, and 74% of the children in these families went on to complete college or vocational training programs. But perhaps most significantly, 68% of the families eventually became involved in helping other families, either through formal volunteer work or by informally mentoring other working-class families facing similar challenges. The model had created not just economic stability but a culture of mutual aid and community responsibility. The Johnson children's individual stories became particularly inspiring examples of how early intervention could shape entire life trajectories. Sarah Johnson's architectural firm, established in 1987, specialized in designing affordable housing that maintained dignity and beauty while keeping costs manageable. Her designs were used in Johnson Presley developments across the Southwest and eventually influenced federal housing design standards. I learned from my father's work with Elvis that good housing isn't a luxury, it's a basic human need, Sarah explained in a 1990 interview with Architectural Digest. But I also learned that affordable doesn't have to mean ugly or institutional. People deserve to live in places that make them feel proud, regardless of their income level. Michael Johnson's path was equally impressive but different. After completing his MBA at Stanford on a scholarship he didn't know Elvis had anonymously funded, Michael became a specialist in developing financial models for nonprofit organizations and social enterprises. His consulting firm helped dozens of organizations across the country develop sustainable funding strategies for programs serving working-class families. The lesson I learned from watching my father and Elvis work together was that good intentions aren't enough, Michael said in a 2000 speech to the National Association of Housing Developers. You need sustainable business models that create value for everyone involved. Charity that makes people dependent isn't charity, it's enabling. True help creates independence and the ability to help others. Tommy Johnson's story was perhaps the most complex of the three children. His dual talents in construction and music led him to a unique career path that bridged both worlds. By day he worked as a project manager for Johnson Construction, the company his father had spun off from their partnership with Elvis's estate after Elvis's death. By night and on weekends he performed with a country rock band that became locally famous for songs about working-class life and family struggles. Tommy's music career took an unexpected turn in 1984 when he wrote a song called Parking Lot Angel about his family's encounter with Elvis. The song became a regional hit and eventually caught the attention of Nashville record producers. Rather than pursuing a solo recording career, Tommy used his music industry connections to create opportunities for other working-class musicians who were struggling to break into the business. I never forgot that our whole life changed because someone with resources decided to help someone with talent but no opportunities. Tommy explained in a 1986 interview with Country Music magazine. I figure if I can do the same thing for other musicians that Elvis did for our family, then I'm keeping the circle going. Tommy established the Working Man's Music Foundation in 1987, which provided small grants, equipment loans and studio time for musicians from working-class backgrounds who showed talent but lacked the financial resources to develop their careers. Over 20 years, the foundation helped launch the careers of dozens of musicians, several of whom went on to achieve national recognition. But the foundation's most important work wasn't creating stars, it was preserving and celebrating the musical traditions of working-class communities across America. Tommy's foundation documented and recorded thousands of songs that might otherwise have been lost, creating an archive of American working-class culture that became invaluable to historians and ethnomusicologists. Linda Johnson's role in their family's transformation was often overlooked in early accounts of their story, but her contributions were equally significant. After returning to nursing when their situation stabilized, Linda specialized in community health work, focusing on providing healthcare access to working families who couldn't afford traditional medical insurance. Linda's healthcare advocacy work led her to develop innovative programs that combined medical care with social services, recognizing that health problems were often symptoms of larger social and economic challenges. Her model of community health centers became influential throughout Nevada and eventually spread to other states. I learned during our time of homelessness that healthcare isn't just about treating illness, Linda explained in a 1992 interview with American Nurse Today. It's about addressing the social conditions that make people vulnerable to illness in the first place. You can't treat someone's diabetes effectively if they don't have stable housing or adequate nutrition. Linda's health centers provided not just medical care but also connections to social services, job training programs, and financial counseling. The holistic approach proved highly effective at improving health outcomes while reducing long-term healthcare costs. By the 1990s, Linda had become a nationally recognized expert on community health models for working-class populations. She testified before Congress on healthcare reform, consulted with state health departments on program development, and trained community health workers across the country. The Johnson family's commitment to education also created lasting impact, recognizing that their own children's success had been made possible partly by educational opportunities. Robert and Linda established scholarship programs for children from working-class families who showed academic promise but lacked financial resources for higher education. The Johnson Family Educational Foundation, established in 1989, provided scholarships that covered not just tuition but also living expenses, books, and other costs that often prevented working-class students from completing college. But more importantly, the foundation provided mentoring and support services that helped students navigate the cultural and social challenges of higher education. We realized that giving kids money for college wasn't enough if they didn't have anyone to help them understand how the system worked. Robert explained in a 1995 interview with Community College Weekly. A lot of working-class kids drop out not because they can't do the academic work, but because they feel out of place or don't understand the unwritten rules. The Foundation's mentoring program paired scholarship recipients with successful professionals from similar backgrounds, providing not just academic support but also guidance on professional development, networking, and career planning. Over 15 years, the program helped more than 200 students complete college degrees, with an 89% graduation rate, significantly higher than the national average for first-generation college students. The economic impact of the Johnson family's various programs was documented in a 1998 study by the Brookings Institution, which estimated that the combined direct and indirect effects of their work had generated more than $50 million in economic activity over 20 years, while helping more than 1,500 families achieve greater economic stability. But the social and cultural impact was equally significant. The Johnson family's approach to addressing poverty through dignity-preserving assistance and genuine opportunity creation influenced policy discussions at both state and federal levels. Their work was cited in legislative debates about welfare reform, housing policy, and workforce development programs. More importantly, their story became a powerful counter-narrative to stereotypes about poverty and homelessness. At a time when political discourse often portrayed the poor as lazy or morally deficient, the Johnson family's experience demonstrated that homelessness could affect hardworking, responsible families who simply couldn't overcome systemic barriers without assistance. The Johnson family's story changed how a lot of people think about poverty, said Dr. Maria Santos, a sociologist at Georgetown University, who studied media representations of homelessness in the 1980s and 1990s. Their story showed that homelessness wasn't a character flaw but a policy failure, and that the solution wasn't more punishment but better opportunities. The story's influence extended beyond policy discussions into popular culture. Tommy's song "Parking Lot Angel" was covered by dozens of artists over the years, becoming something of a folk anthem for working-class communities. The song's message that help can come from unexpected sources and that dignity can be maintained even in desperate circumstances resonated with audiences far beyond country music fans. In 1993, the Johnson family's story was featured in a television documentary called When Angels Wear Jumpsuits, which won an Emmy Award for Outstanding Documentary Programming. The documentary not only told their story but also followed several other families who had been helped by Johnson Presley programs over the years. The documentary's impact was significant, generating thousands of letters from viewers and inspiring the creation of similar programs in communities across the country. More than 24 cities established their own versions of the Johnson Presley model, adapting it to local conditions and needs. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition of their impact came in 1996, when President Clinton invited the Johnson family to the White House for the signing of welfare reform legislation. While they had concerns about some aspects of the new law, they were honored to be recognized for their work in developing alternatives to traditional welfare programs. What the Johnson family and Elvis Presley proved is that Americans don't want handouts, they want opportunities. President Clinton said during the signing ceremony, "Their model shows how we can help people while preserving their dignity and building their capacity for independence." By the late 1990s, the Johnson family had achieved something remarkable. They had transformed their personal experience of poverty and homelessness into a systematic approach to helping others that had generated measurable, lasting change in hundreds of communities and thousands of lives. But they never forgot where they started, and they never lost touch with the realities faced by working-class families. Each of them continued to live modestly despite their success, and each remained actively involved in direct service to families in need. Robert continued working in construction until his retirement in 2001, but he also spent time mentoring other contractors and small business owners who were struggling to build sustainable enterprises. His approach always emphasized quality workmanship, fair treatment of employees, and reinvestment of profits into community development. Linda continued her nursing career until 2003, but she also trained community health workers and developed training curricula that were used in nursing schools across the country. Her work helped establish community health nursing as a recognized specialty within the profession. The three Johnson children all remained committed to the values their parents had modeled: hard work, integrity, and the responsibility to help others who were facing similar challenges to those their family had overcome. In 2000, on the 25th anniversary of their encounter with Elvis, the Johnson family organized a reunion of all the families who had been helped by their various programs over the years. More than 300 people attended the gathering in Las Vegas, representing dozens of families whose lives had been changed by programs that traced their origins back to that September night in a Denny's parking lot. The reunion featured presentations by families who had achieved home ownership through rent-to-own programs, workers who had found steady employment through job placement services, students who had completed college with scholarship support, and entrepreneurs who had started businesses with microloans from Johnson family programs. But the most moving moment came when Tommy Johnson, now 33 years old and the father of 2 young children, stood up to address the gathering. 25 years ago, my family was sleeping in a car behind a Denny's restaurant, Tommy said, his voice strong but emotional. We had lost our home. My dad was working 3 jobs but still couldn't afford rent, and my parents were trying to figure out how to explain to their children why we didn't have a house like other families. He paused, looking around at the room full of families who had experienced their own struggles and triumphs. But we learned that night that sometimes help comes from the most unexpected places, and that the measure of a person isn't whether they need help, but what they do with the help they receive. Every family in this room is proof that when people are given genuine opportunities, they don't just succeed, they use their success to help others. Tommy's words captured the essence of what the Johnson family had learned, and what their story had come to represent: that poverty is not a moral failing but a systemic problem, that help should preserve dignity rather than create dependency, and that true success is measured not by what you accumulate but by what you contribute to others. As the reunion concluded, participants made commitments to continue expanding the network of mutual aid and support that had grown from Elvis's simple decision to help a family in need. New programs were planned, mentorship relationships were established, and connections were made that would generate additional opportunities for families facing challenges. Tommy Johnson, now a successful adult with children of his own, still tells the story of their camping adventure and the promise his father made in that parking lot. But he also tells the story of the man who helped his father keep that promise, and the lesson that true strength comes not from never needing help, but from using the help you receive to help others in return. The story continues today through the work of the Johnson Family Foundation, which has now helped more than 5,000 families achieve greater economic stability over nearly 50 years. The foundation's work has been recognized with numerous awards and has been studied by researchers, policymakers, and practitioners around the world. But for the Johnson family, the greatest recognition is not the awards or academic studies. It's the letters they receive from families whose lives have been changed, the graduation ceremonies they attend for scholarship recipients, the business openings they celebrate for entrepreneurs they've supported, and the knowledge that their experience of homelessness and recovery has created opportunities for thousands of others to overcome their own challenges and build better futures for their children.